Hello, and welcome to an interesting in-between episode of Prose. No, this won't be a full episode full of new tales. However, I will be featuring two of my favorite tales from the past year. 2019 has been a wonderful year for the podcast, and I can't thank you enough for listening. Do forgive my odd sound as, yet again, I am traveling, recording from the closet of a hotel room. Still, I wanted to get you all at least a little something before we wander into 2020 together here in just a couple days. So, this week, we are going to revisit our first and only travel log by an anonymous author, and we're going to deal with the breakup in a not-so-clean way. Just as a note, both stories, as do most of the stories on this podcast, contain violence, sexuality, some language, and just some suggestive material. I haven't made that note in some time, and with so many new listeners coming in, I thought it might be appropriate to put out a little reminder. Alright, let's get to the tales one last time in 2019, shall we? The first story this week, as I mentioned, comes from a dear friend. This dear friend wishes to remain anonymous, both as the author and narrator of this piece. So without further ado, please enjoy South America by Anonymous.
I never thought that a chance encounter on a bus in Patagonia would have a ripple effect on my most current life events. Years ago, a 24-year-old me was working on finding myself on the Argentine side of Patagonia. At one point on my trip, I purposely found myself sitting behind an extremely handsome man with long dark hair. He woke up from a nap startled, obviously not knowing where he was going. I gently tapped him on the shoulder and told him, "Nos vamos al Chaltén." He shook his head in understanding and then did a double take, staring at my eyes. Blue eyes will get you a lot of flattery in South America, and Argentines will let you know it. That was the beginning of a 4-year relationship. A relationship that always had romantic undertones, but clear logistical shortcomings. Those 4 years were filled with short Facebook messages, photos, and kind words. A few months ago, these check-ins became daily contact, usually ending in some sort of heart eye emojis. This timing was also impeccable because I was planning on returning to South America once I had enough travel points to get there. About a month and a half after we started talking seriously, I booked my ticket. Peru, Chile, and Argentina for the entire month of July. His winter break started mid-July, so that was when we would reunite. He seemed shocked that I was prepared to come see him. He had asked on a couple occasions that if I was sure I wanted to see him. My response was always an enthusiastic yes, with a heart eye emoji. This was supposed to be the time that I started to find my real feelings for this man. I agreed to meet in Mendoza Capital, Argentina. He drove with a friend from Buenos Aires. While I thought that they would be leaving at the same time and arriving at the same time as myself, I learned my first harsh lesson on Argentine time. It's like Central American time, but twice as late. After spending the first night alone in our rented apartment, the anticipation was killing me. Almost 12 hours later, I had anticipated reuniting with him. He had finally made it. This is what I've been waiting for. Unfortunately, I was a tad disappointed in the passion department. Maybe the months of anticipation had put too much pressure on this reunion. For me, I lost all my drive after the bro time with his friend and the quick emotional distance that I felt or had maybe created in my head from this man I had traveled so far to see. Distance is a really funny thing. Even if I had known this man for years, I had spoken to him every day for months. When I was with him, I felt further away from him than ever. He was always up, crazy late hours, and I was always in bed by 1 a.m., which is not considered late there. Sometimes him and his friends would discuss topics in the front seat of the car, like topics such as women in their past, and I would sit silently in the back wondering if they had forgotten if I was there. Even if I speak Spanish, there was a clear distinction between our dialects, and we both spent way too much time explaining ourselves. Through all these little signs, I still wanted to push through because I had gone so far, over 5,000 miles. Since I had decided to ignore all of the little signs that we were not meant to be, in our last few hours together, God decided to send me a massive sign. We were driving from Mendoza to Buenos Aires, where we were prepared to separate. We went through a normal security checkpoint in Santa Fe. But shortly after, we were stopped again, but this time it was by different authorities. I didn't notice until I was asked to get out of the car and saw the narcotráfico signs posted. I stood there confused as they had the detection dog sniff the car, our bags, our jackets. I watched the dog sniff and sit down. Then the officer threw a ball to reward the dog on its hard work. And the two other officers were taking a selfie. But then one started to prepare to do some paperwork on the computer. And so, amongst all that confusion and some people seeming very relaxed, I started to get very nervous. When they came up to talk to me, it was painfully obvious that I was not from there. And it was clearly strange that I was sitting in the back of a car with two Argentine men. But I spent the next 45 minutes talking to the officers about my relationship with them while the other men were being searched. The officers were a bit taken back by my explanation of how I knew them, but understood my situation. But then they hit me with the news. Tenían cocaína, the officer explained, flatly. At this point, my heart was racing. I had been with these guys for 11 days at this point and had no inclination that they had any drugs. Not until, I guess, I was looking back on what I thought was normal sleeping behavior. Once reality hit, I realized that I was not sure what was going to happen next. We were hours from Buenos Aires, and there were no other cars on the road. I honestly thought we would spend the night in these trailers or be arrested, and my anxiety was through the roof. Then the officer started asking me about the United States, and then asking about if he could come to visit, and if he could stay with me. And my brain was so overwhelmed at this point, all I could do was smile and shake my head. How serious is this that's happening right now? If an officer is asking me this type of question, I was so confused. But, once I had the guts to ask what would happen, I found out it was just a warning for these men. They had to write down my information on the report, but I read that I was marked as present but innocent. They had to take our pictures with their cell phones. So somewhere in the middle of Argentina are these drug officers with my passport information and my picture, which doesn't seem safe. But I was silent the next few hours driving. I was strong enough not to cry in the back of the car, but when we finally reached Buenos Aires, I was so excited to be rid of the two of them. I was finally going to be able to relax and breathe. And after saying an unromantic and short goodbye, I got to leave 4 years of the past behind me. Even if this story doesn't sound very Christian, I'm always looking to the Lord for guidance. And anyone who knows the Lord knows that He has a sense of humor. The guy that I had come to see had left his cell phone in the car. It turns out that in my hasty exit, I left some things in the car as well. So I spent my last weekend trying to get these guys organized and to get all of our materials back. And this finally happened minutes before I had to leave for the airport. So with one last and final short and unromantic goodbye, I think now I can finally say I can leave my past in Argentina. At least once I felt that way after I made it safely back through immigration and was welcomed back home without an issue. Going back to work days after an incident like that sure puts things into perspective. Late to a meeting? Stressed out about the amount of work to do upon returning? Well, I survived a drug bust in South America, so remember that things could be worse. And although everything ended well, I'm hoping that the ripple effect from my past is stopped, and I don't plan on skipping any stones on that lake ever again. However, I have learned that it is all out of my control. So for now, I will pray for tranquil waters.
I certainly hope you enjoyed South America. Though I cannot tell you the author and narrator's name, she is a close friend and someone quite dear to me that I met in the far reaches of Peru. Certainly, we here at Prose hope that we'll hear more from her in the future. All sounds that you hear in the background of this story come from freesound.org and are being used under CC 01.0 Universal Public Domain Dedication licenses. I hope you all enjoyed this very first travel log style confessional. I love this type of reality mixed in with our fiction. Please stick around for another story from Prose. We'll see you there. Take a Break. An original short story by Jared I. McGee. Keeping my options open might be one of the most disgusting phrases, concepts one can encounter in this life. The narcissism, using of people as stepping stones, and general cowardice that all make up this, yes, cowardly practice, is nauseating and borders on sociopathy.
Listen, Jeff, I just need to find myself. I have so much living to do, and, well, let's be honest. What we've been doing is boring. Let's just call it a break. We'll see what my next few international work trips bring, and in a year, maybe 2, we'll go from there. We'll re-meet each other. You have to understand that I have to keep my options open. I need a clean break to live. Be alive.
What an odd thing to be echoing in Gina's mind as she lay in an ever-cooling barrage of water and an ever-growing pool of her own blood. That's what she had said to Jeff almost 3 months ago to the day. After 3 years together that were, and she did have to admit it, joyous, and by far the healthiest relationship she'd had with any man, she had been given a promotion at work. This promotion would actually see her making less money, but it would also see her traveling the world. She'd been jet-setting with the best and the brightest in the business world, and in style, making up for her drop in pay. Her main countries of influence in her new position with the firm were Australia, New Zealand, Greece, Italy, France, and Spain. She had drawn the 2 markets that everyone fought for. That's right. She, Jenna Infram, would basically be paid to vacation. Consultation on business ethics wasn't exactly demanding. Moreover, her expertise in company benefits in regards to children and on-site children's services meant that she was often finished with her assignments and or use for various companies and their HR and legal departments in 1/10 of the time her bosses seemed to think it might take her. Upon receiving the news, then, she knew she simply couldn't allow herself not to take the opportunity for one last year to 2 years' worth of whirlwind living. Yes, she was well past her get blitzed and get fucked by some anonymous bull days. It was about time for her to fully embrace adulthood after all, but again, this was just too much to pass up. She thought of all the wild nights, all the photos to be envied by her friends and coworkers, all the shifting from a life that was too real. Her travels with the firm would mean there would be no insurance renewals, monthly bills to pay, house upkeep, office ins and outs, visits to her family, visits to his family, cleaning. All of this and more would disappear. The firm taking care of some of it, and some of it just ceasing to exist the moment she walked away from this burdensome life. Jeff, of course, had not taken the news well. Tears, blubbering, the whole shebang. She humored him with a warm ear but a cold shoulder. She couldn't have their mutual friends judging her for the why behind her decisions. This run with the firm would only be a year or two long, and she couldn't burn all her bridges. So, she put in minimal effort to give Jeff the time to lose his shit, and then she was off. Her first trip had been to New Zealand. It had been amazing. She had lived every cliche she could possibly squish into a month-long period of popping about the country. Sex, drugs, rock and roll, tourist traps, adventure touring. Gina did it all. Her second trip was to hop on over to Australia. It had also been wonderful. She had lived every cliche she possibly could squish into a 2-month-long period this time. Far greater qualities and quantities of sex, drugs, rock and roll, tourist traps, adventure touring. Gina continued to do it all. After her Oceania region consultations, she flew to LA for debriefs and a reset in the company's line toward customers. Apparently, Oceania's product concepts were much different than those of the Mediterranean and Europe. Gina had a week of learning what to say, what not to say, and how to say both before she was off on her second trip to Greece. Almost 4 months in, and she was feeling like a rock star, Jeff did not cross her mind once. Not ever. This first extended trip to Greece started rough, though. Gina should have known that this was an omen. Apparently, her company's contacts were not in Athens proper, so upon touching down in the ancient metropolis, she was quickly ushered into a less than glamorous, banged-up SUV that took her to nearby Akarnas. The suburb was full of 3-star hotels and was all but devoid of the nightlife that fed the appetites to which Gina had become accustomed to feeding. Still, she reminded herself again just how much better this all was than being shackled to an everyday, mundane adult life back in the US. At the end of the day of travel, all she wanted to do was wash the grime off of her and get some sleep before her presentations tomorrow. Once those were out of the way, there'd be far more time to head back into Athens and find some Greek men and ouzo to make this month start turning around really quickly. With those future forays into unshackled fun fresh in the front of her mind and fluttering on her lips, Gina started the shower, allowing it to heat up, and began to undress. She always loved to run the shower until the steam made the air thick and too warm for most. She tossed her traveling clothes on the floor, loving that there was no one there that she needed to worry about putting out or off by leaving such a mess, and she went to take her long-awaited shower. Gina tested the water again with her hand, making sure that the water was just on the other edge of uncomfortably hot. Vivid visions of what Greece might hold in store were streaming through her mind as she stepped lightly into the tub. Tired or not, she might make this shower a little more interesting. Then, confusion. She'd stepped in with her left foot. She'd felt a real sinking feeling in her stomach. heard a snap reminiscent of when she'd helped her father burn wood scraps from their yard, the sticks, twigs, and larger limbs cracking under the assault of the fire. She was lying down. She used to lie down in the shower when she was younger. She thought it was soothing, almost hypnotic. But then she did not do so in lukewarm water, and there was never blood around. What was going on? When she tried to sit up, pain rolled over her. She blinked heavy-lidded, taking an unmoving assessment. Gina realized she saw bone protruding from her right thigh. Blood was gushing from the hole where it was peeking out beyond her skin. The knee and thigh were at an angle that even her befuddled mind knew meant danger, meant pain. With the slightest tilt of her head left, she saw bone coming from her left arm, too. She must have fallen. She must have passed out. How long had she been down for? This was a lot of blood, and the water was far cooler than when she'd entered. She tried to get up once more before pain knocked her back into a prone position, threatening to make her black out. Gina called out for help. Her voice sounded weak, even to her. Over the shower, she doubted that anyone could hear her. She was getting extremely tired. She knew this was bad. If she went to sleep, she had no illusions that this meant she would die. The water would continue to cool. She would continue to bleed. The driver would report her as a no-show and go about his day in the morning. No one would think twice about it, her having ditched or rescheduled meetings to accommodate her new lifestyle before. It could be as long as 2, maybe 3 days before anyone might find her. Gina tried to pick herself up again. This time she pushed a foot or two off the tub before slipping again, falling backward and hitting the back of her head. Fireworks launched into her vision. She didn't black out, though. Still, Gina knew she was in real trouble. Her mind started to dance through everything that someone confronting their mortality generally thinks about. Family, childhood, past, fading future, mistakes, triumphs, religion. Unsummoned, Jeff came back to her for the first time in months. Jeff represented all of those things. He loved her family. He wanted her to be his family. He wanted to start a family. He had shared his childhood with her and showed genuine interest in hers. He had made her feel like a queen when they'd met. He had wanted to marry her. He had come to neglect her feelings. He had pushed her to be a better woman, always supporting her in all her efforts, even when the neglect came on, save this last one, of course. He had grown up in the church, which gave him a charm and calmness that she'd not seen in other men and other friends. Jeff, uninvited, was there with her, comforting her as she began to drift closer and closer to unconsciousness. He was always there for her until she'd pushed him away. And even now, he was back. Their life together played before her eyes. Their life as it could have been played before her eyes. While her words to him, as she let him know she was discarding him, began to ping around as an accompaniment.
Listen, Jeff, I just need to find myself. Listen, Jeff, I just need to find myself. Listen, Jeff, I have so much living to do. Listen, Jeff, I just need to find myself. Let's just call it a break. Much living to do. We'll see what my next few. Let's just figure work trips bring. And be honest. We'll see what my next maybe 2 extra road trips bring. And we'll see what my next few work trips bring. And we'll see what my next year maybe 2 work trips bring. And we need each other here, maybe 2. The understand. We need each other to live. My options open. You have to understand that I have to keep my options open. Be alive. I need a clean break to live. Be alive.
Gina began to snicker, giggle, cackle. Her clean break had turned messy. Thank you for listening to A Clean Break, an original short story by me, Jared I. McGee. All sounds that you hear present come from freesound.org and are being used under public domain licenses. Once again, I hope you've enjoyed this time together here at the end of 2019. I'll be seeing you pretty close to the new year, hint hint. And, of course, we'll pick back up as usual in 2 weeks' time. Thank you for listening as always. Don't forget to love those around you, tell them that you do, and embrace this life, as it is always stranger than fiction. Once more, thanks for joining me.